Imagine a king so powerful that his name not only resounded but echoed like thunder across all known nations. A ruler whose presence made kings tremble, whose orders shaped the destiny of empires. His dominion was unrivaled, his strength was absolute, his influence stretched like an implacable shadow over entire kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar, the supreme monarch of Babylon, was not only feared, he was revered as a god among men. Under his command, armies marched like merciless storms, swallowing cities and subduing peoples with overwhelming fury. No fortress was strong enough, no wall high enough to halt the advance of his empire. As his troops conquered territories, his architects erected colossuses of stone and gold that defied the heavens, making Babylon the most resplendent jewel of the ancient world. Its streets bustled with merchants, its towers reflected the sun's brightness, and its palaces bore witness to unprecedented power. Yet behind this spectacle of glory and supremacy lay something deeper and more dangerous, a man whose arrogance knew no bounds. His pride was not only great, it was absolute. He not only believed himself to be the master of the world, but he saw his will as unquestionable, his power as eternal. Every conquest fed his pride, every monument he erected was proof of his own immortality. But he did not yet know that, however great his greatness, there was something infinitely superior, something that not even the greatest of kings could defy with impunity. The scriptures tell us not just the story of a king, but the rise and fall of a man who believed himself to be above his own destiny. The story of Nebuchadnezzar is not just the story of a ruthless conqueror, but a stunning testimony to the eternal battle between human pride and divine majesty. He was no mere ruler, but a sharp instrument in the hands of the Almighty, used to judge entire nations, including Israel. Yet the same God who granted him power, glory, and absolute dominion also brought him to the dust to teach him a lesson that no army or wall could protect. From a golden throne, where he was worshipped as a demigod, Nebuchadnezzar was reduced to the most humiliating state possible, crawling like an animal, cut off from his own humanity, losing not only his kingdom but his sanity. His pride, once unbreakable, was crushed under the weight of the truth. He was not a god, but a mere man before the sovereign will of the Creator. His story is not only a warning about the dangers of arrogance, it is a deafening cry that no earthly greatness can stand before the divine eternity. But at the same time, his life proves something even greater, that even those who fall in the most humiliating ways can be restored if they recognize that all glory belongs to God. His birth was no ordinary event, but a milestone in a period of upheaval and transformation in Mesopotamia. That night, under the starry sky, surrounded by the imposing walls of Babylon, the heir to an empire destined for greatness was born. The wind blew gently over the waters of the Euphrates, carrying with it the murmurs of destiny. The pulse of the city reflected the grandeur of that moment. Celebrations spread through the streets, priests raised prayers to the gods, and astrologers observed the stars, seeking signs about the future of the one who had just been born. That boy was not just another prince. He was Nebuchadnezzar, the son of Nabopolassar, the heir to a lineage that bore the weight of a colossal mission. From his earliest years, he was not allowed to be just a child. He was molded to be a king. He grew up in the shadow of marching armies, to the sound of discussions of politics, military strategy, and palace intrigue. His father, the great liberator of Babylon, had broken the chains of Assyrian rule, but his dream went further. He wanted more than a mighty city. He wanted to build an empire that would make nations tremble. And Nebuchadnezzar, gifted with a keen intellect, a penetrating gaze, and an insatiable ambition, did not just inherit that dream. He embraced it as an inescapable destiny. He would not just be a king, but the ruler whose name would be inscribed in eternity, the one whose rule would echo through the ages. Greatness was not just a goal for him, it was his birthright. As the years passed, Nebuchadnezzar not only excelled, he became a force of nature, a name that would make kings tremble and nations bow. His military genius was not simply the result of training, but of an insatiable ambition ambition that burned within him like a fire that would never be quenched. While others were content with the present, he immersed himself in the knowledge of the past to shape the future he wished to dominate. In the bustling streets of Babylon, amid the cries of merchants selling rare spices and the murmurs of sages who preserved the secrets of ancient times, he absorbed it all like a sponge. But his hunger was not just for wisdom, it was for glory, for an empire that would echo forever into eternity. His gaze was ever beyond the horizon, his mind constantly devising new ways to expand his domain. And then the decisive moment arrived. With Nabopolassar's death, the throne of Babylon ceased to be a destiny, it became a reality. Surrounded by challenges that would destroy ordinary men and enemies who awaited his first failure, he did not hesitate. There was no doubt in his eyes, only the certainty that his journey did not end here. It was only beginning, and nothing in this world could stop him. Nebuchadnezzar's coronation was not just an event, it was a spectacle of power and grandeur that marked the beginning of a new era. Under the blazing sun of Mesopotamia, he ascended the throne of Babylon with the majesty of a monarch destined for immortality. Trumpets echoed off the mighty walls, his subjects gathered in crowds to shout his name, and priests raised prayers to the gods, blessing him who would rule with an iron fist. The gold on his crown gleamed, reflecting not only the light of day, but the weight of responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. But behind the glory of the ceremony, reality was grim. The world did not bow to words or coronations, it demanded displays of strength. And the first great challenge was not long in coming. The remnants of the once mighty Assyrian Empire, now allied with the Egyptians, refused to accept Babylon's supremacy. To them, Nebuchadnezzar was still a young monarch who needed to prove his worth. But he did not hesitate, he did not back down. If the world wanted proof of his strength, he would give it. And without wasting time, with the deafening sound of war drums, he marched into battle, determined to crush anyone who dared to question his authority. The Battle of Carchemish was not just a victory, it was a massacre that etched Nebuchadnezzar's name into eternity. Against a backdrop of dust, blood, and steel, he demonstrated a military genius that surpassed that of any commander of his time. His tactics were razor-sharp, his leadership fierce and unquestionable. The enemy army, made up of the remnants of Assyria and the proud Egyptians, believed they could halt the Babylonian rise. But they were wrong. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon not only won, it crushed its opponents without mercy. The enemy forces were shattered, its warriors annihilated or forced into humiliating flight. The impact of this triumph was colossal. The echoes of the Assyrian and Egyptian defeat resounded throughout Mesopotamia, and Nebuchadnezzar's name became synonymous with absolute power. He was no longer just an heir to the throne, no longer just the son of Nabopolassar. When he returned to Babylon, he was greeted as a god of war, a ruthless conqueror who bent nations to his will. But his gaze was not fixed on the past, not even on his recent glory. For him, Carchemish was only the beginning. There were still more territories to subdue, more crowns to overthrow, more glories to inscribe in history. He did not want to be just a powerful king. He wanted to be the greatest of all. Thus his path crossed with Judah, a small but stubborn nation, a grain of sand in the face of the colossal empire of Babylon, yet one that persisted in defying the authority of the greatest monarch on earth. The rulers of Judah wavered between submission to Egypt and obedience to Babylon, playing a dangerous game of dubious loyalties. But Nebuchadnezzar was not a man of games. When King Jehoiakim dared to defy him, the answer came like a thunderclap. There was no negotiation, no mercy. He marched with his legions on Jerusalem, and the city fell under the weight of his fury. The sacred temple of Solomon, which for centuries had been the spiritual heart of Judah, was plundered without mercy. The treasures of the chosen people were stripped and carried to Babylon as symbols of the conquering king's unquestionable victory. Nobles and leaders were dragged in chains, taken captive from their homeland, and a new order was imposed with the iron hand of Nebuchadnezzar. But Judah, even wounded, still breathed. The remnants of resistance continued to smolder like embers beneath the ashes, and the Babylonian king knew that as long as sparks of insubordination nation remained, his rule would not be complete. And then he returned, this time not to subdue, but to obliterate. In 586 BC, Jerusalem was reduced to nothing. Its walls were torn down, its houses burned, its inhabitants decimated or driven into exile. The great temple, once the symbol of a people's covenant with their God, was reduced to smoldering ruins. Nothing remained but the echo of a civilization that had defied the wrong empire. The destruction of Jerusalem became a warning to the world. Nebuchadnezzar's wrath was absolute, and no king, no city, no nation was beyond his reach. With his enemies vanquished and his rule consolidated, Nebuchadnezzar set his sights on an even greater ambition, not just to rule the world, but to shape it in his own image. He wanted Babylon to be not just a city, but the center of the universe, a living monument to his supremacy, a masterpiece that would defy the gods themselves. Under his command, colossal temples rose in honor of the Babylonian gods. Palaces adorned with gold and precious stones were built to reflect their glory, and the legendary Tower of Babel, with its steps ascending to the heavens, shone like a divine beacon, proclaiming to the world that Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was not just an empire, it was a myth being written in stone. But among all his achievements, one would become one of the greatest wonders in history: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Created, according to reports, for his wife Amytis, who missed the lush mountains of her homeland, the gardens were an unprecedented spectacle of engineering. Elevated terraces covered in lush vegetation, cascading waterfalls that defied the aridity of the desert, a lushness impossible to create by man. The scent of exotic flowers mingled with the sound of crystal-clear waters, and those who walked there felt as if they were in an earthly paradise. Babylon was not just a city, it was the culmination of civilization, an immortal testament to the greatness of the man who built it. Every paved street, every impassable wall, every carved statue exuded power, and at the center of it all stood Nebuchadnezzar, the King of Kings, the architect of an empire without equal. But behind all this opulence, something disturbed him. His monuments defied time, his name echoed throughout the land, but deep in his soul, a shadow loomed. A foreboding, a nagging feeling that, however great his glory, something beyond his comprehension was coming, and that perhaps not even the greatest of kings could escape his fate. Nebuchadnezzar's nights, once peaceful and filled with glory, became haunted by visions that made him wake up in a cold sweat. His dreams, once a haven of rest, became terrifying omens, enigmatic messages that seemed to whisper truths he was not ready to hear. In one of these visions, he saw something that left him uneasy: a colossal statue, imposing and majestic, composed of different materials. Its head was of shining gold, its arms and chest of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet a fragile mixture of iron and clay. But then, the unthinkable happened. A stone, not sculpted by human hands, suddenly appeared and struck the statue with devastating force. The impact was absolute. The entire statue crumbled like dust in the wind, reduced to nothing, and the stone, previously small, began to grow until it became a gigantic mountain that covered the entire earth. Nebuchadnezzar woke up gasping for breath. What did that mean? A warning, a premonition of something to come? Anguish consumed him. None of his magicians, fortune-tellers, or wise men could decipher the meaning of the dream. The greatest king on earth, owner of the most glorious empire of the time, was powerless in the face of an enigma that was corroding his soul. But then, a name appeared: Daniel, a young captive from Judah, one of the people he had crushed, a servant rumored to possess uncommon wisdom. Reluctant but desperate for answers, Nebuchadnezzar ordered him brought before him. And it was there, before the Babylonian throne, that Daniel, with unwavering boldness and faith, revealed the truth. He did not waver, did not bow before Nebuchadnezzar's power. In a firm voice, he announced, "O king, you are the head of gold. Your kingdom is great, but it will not last forever. After you will come other kingdoms, each one inferior to the last, until finally a kingdom not made with hands will arise and destroy all the others. It will be an everlasting kingdom, established by the Most High God." Daniel's words fell like a thunderbolt upon on Nebuchadnezzar. For the first time, the absolute ruler of Babylon faced a truth that his mind refused to accept. His glory had an end. His empire, however great, was just a passing piece in history, and in the end, everything he built would be reduced to dust. The revelation was a devastating blow to Nebuchadnezzar. The king, who saw himself as a god among men, could not accept that his empire, forged with blood, conquest, and glory, would one day disintegrate. The idea that his majesty was fleeting corroded his soul like an invisible poison. His pride, wounded by Daniel's prophecy, demanded an answer. He needed to reaffirm his supremacy. He needed something that would demonstrate to the world that his power was absolute. It was then that his mind conceived a grandiose idea. He ordered the construction of a colossal statue, entirely of gold, resplendent under the scorching Babylonian sun. It was not enough to be a symbol of his glory. It had to be an unquestionable decree of loyalty. He proclaimed that everyone, without exception, should bow down and worship that image as proof of obedience to his rule. Those who dared to defy his order would face the cruelest punishment possible. They would be thrown alive into a fiery furnace. And so, on the appointed day, to the sound of trumpets and instruments, a multitude prostrated themselves before the statue. But amidst the sea of kneeling bodies, 3 men remained standing, unwavering. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, refused to bow their knees before an idol. The news spread quickly, reaching the ears of the king. When Nebuchadnezzar heard of the affront, his fury exploded like an uncontrolled fire. His wounded pride cried out for retaliation. Furious, he ordered the 3 to be brought before him. With a merciless look, he gave them one last chance. If you bow down now, you will live. But if you refuse, there is no God who can deliver you from my hands. But the young men, with a courage that defied all logic, replied, "If our God wills, he will deliver us from the furnace. But even if he does not, we will never bow down to this image." The words echoed through the palace like a direct challenge to the king himself. Nebuchadnezzar's fury reached its peak. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, so hot that even the soldiers who threw them into the fire were consumed by the flames. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the midst of the fire, and the king, satisfied, waited to see them reduced to ashes. But then something impossible happened. Silence fell over the hall as Nebuchadnezzar's eyes widened in disbelief. He leaned forward, unable to believe what he was seeing. With a trembling voice, he asked his advisors, "Did we not throw 3 men into the fire?" "Yes, O king," they replied. Then he pointed to the furnace, his voice thick with amazement. "Then why do I see 4? And the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Before his astonished eyes, the 3 young men walked through the fire unharmed. The flames that should have consumed them seemed unable to touch them, and beside them stood a resplendent figure, shining like a celestial being. The fire that should have been their destruction had become their refuge. Astonished, Nebuchadnezzar rose from his throne and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." And the 3 emerged from the furnace without a single hair on their heads or the smell of smoke on their clothes. The king, who had previously demanded worship of his statue, now stood before an undeniable miracle. With a choked voice, he declared, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No other can deliver like this God. The most powerful king on earth, the one who made nations tremble at the sound of his name, who demanded absolute obedience and unquestioning veneration, now found himself faced with a truth that crushed his pride like a breath of wind blows away dust. He who had believed himself above all gods now recognized that his authority was nothing compared to the sovereignty of the true God. His iron decree of forced worship was torn apart by the fire of the furnace, but not as he had expected. The furnace itself, ignited in an act of defiance against the Most High, became the scene of his humiliation and the triumph of the God he had tried to defy. What What was supposed to be a spectacle of punishment became a proclamation of divine glory. What was supposed to be a testament to the king's wrath became incontrovertible evidence that the power of heaven does not bend to the will of men. Nebuchadnezzar, who commanded all to kneel before his golden statue, now bowed spiritually before that which he could never control. His voice, once filled with pride and fury, now trembled as he declared before them all, "No other God can save like this." The ruler of Babylon had discovered, in the most crushing way possible, that his glory was fleeting, but God's power was eternal. Yet not even such a great miracle was enough to completely break Nebuchadnezzar's pride. His heart was still hardened, his mind still refusing to accept that, however glorious he might be, he was still just a man before the eternity of God. Pride still pulsed within him, fueled by Babylon's impenetrable walls, its resplendent palaces, and the conquests that extended his empire as far as the eye could see. Then one day he stood on the terraces of his palace and looked out over his magnificent city, its golden towers, its colossal temples, and its streets throbbing with life. With a look of triumph, he stood tall and proclaimed, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my own power and for the glory of my name?" His pride echoed like a challenge to the heavens. But before he could even savor his own arrogance, a voice from on high cut through the air like thunder. "O Nebuchadnezzar, your authority has been taken from you. You will be driven from among men, and you will live with the animals, and you will eat grass like oxen. This will be the case until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives to whomever he wishes." And in that same instant, the seemingly impossible happened. The greatest king on earth, the ruler who had subjugated entire nations, lost everything. His sanity was blown away like dust in the wind. His majesty was ripped from him in a single divine breath. His gaze, once piercing and calculating, became empty, savage. The royal robe fell from his shoulders. The golden rings slipped from his trembling fingers. He fled, disoriented, like a shadow of himself. Thus, the great Nebuchadnezzar, who had once commanded implacable armies and built a city that defied time, was reduced to the most humiliating condition possible. He was no longer a king. He was no longer a man. For 7 years, he wandered the countryside, without conscience, without dignity, living like a beast. His hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, his nails became claws, and his skin, once covered in royal robes, was now exposed to the cold of the night and the merciless heat of the sun. His food no longer came from the opulent tables of the palace, but from the ground, from the grass that the oxen chewed. The king who thought he had absolute power now crawled across the earth, reminding the world that no throne, no matter how glorious, can stand before the sovereignty of God. When he finally raised his eyes to the heavens, something extraordinary happened. The man who had once considered himself a god, who commanded nations to bow before him, now, for the first time, recognized his own insignificance. And it was in that instant, in that act of humility before the Creator, that his mind, previously plunged into the darkness of madness, was restored. The veil of pride fell from his eyes, and he understood a truth that he had always resisted accepting. All the power, all the glory, all the majesty that he had once thought was his had never belonged to him. They had always belonged to the Most High God. The king who had once proclaimed his own greatness now understood that he was nothing more than a breath before divine eternity. His pride, once unbreakable, had been crushed by the weight of the truth. The gold on his throne was worthless before the heavenly authority. The insurmountable walls of Babylon could not protect him from divine judgment. He, the greatest king on earth, was nothing without God. When he returned to the throne, he was no longer the same man. His arrogance had been replaced by reverence. His haughtiness had given way to humility. He no longer proclaimed his own glory, but exalted the one who reigns over all. Now he knew that true greatness is not measured by domination over men, but by surrender to the will of God. Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign who had ruled with an iron fist, finally understood that the only eternal throne was not his, but that of the Most High. The story of Nebuchadnezzar is not just a tale of the past. It is an eternal warning, a divine cry that echoes through the centuries. It proves beyond doubt that man's arrogance is a fatal trap, that pride builds empires only to see them crumble. Pride is the root of downfall, but humility is the door to redemption. He began his journey as an invincible conqueror, a king who thought he had the world at his feet. His name made nations tremble, his armies destroyed kingdoms, his monuments defied the heavens. But no wall, however high, could protect him from the hand of the Most High. No throne, however golden, could sustain him before the eternity of God. In the end, his true legacy was not that of a conqueror, but that of a man who had to be reduced to nothing in order to understand that he was not everything. He had to lose his sanity in order to find the truth. He had to crawl like an animal to understand that he was not a god. And when he finally looked up to heaven, when he accepted that all glory belongs to God, he was not only restored, he was transformed. Nebuchadnezzar teaches us that human power is a breath before divine sovereignty, that the empires of men pass away, but the kingdom of God is eternal, that no throne, no matter how imposing, can compare to the majesty of the Creator. His story is living proof that the proud fall, but those who bow before God are exalted forever. If you like this story and want to know more inspiring stories from the Bible, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Together, we will explore more stories of faith and transformation.